His last wish before execution to see his pup. What happened under the blood moon changed everything. The silver chains burned against Kieran's wrists like liquid fire, each link forged specifically to weaken his wolf and keep him human. He sat hunched in the corner of what used to be his own Pax holding cell, the irony not lost on him that he'd helped design this very dungeon 5 years ago. Back then, he'd never imagined he'd be the one trapped behind these reinforced steel bars. The scent of his own blood mingled with the musty dampness of the underground chamber. 3 days without shifting. 3 days of forced humanity while his wolf clawed desperately at the barriers in his mind. The pain was almost unbearable, like trying to hold your breath underwater while your lungs screamed for air. How did it come to this? Kieran closed his eyes and let his mind drift back to better times, when the Moonridge Pack still looked at him with respect instead of hatred. 2 years earlier, Alpha, the Morrison Pack, is requesting safe passage through our territory again, Jake, his former head warrior, had said during a morning briefing. The conference room had been filled with warm sunlight streaming through tall windows, and Kieran remembered feeling proud of how peaceful their lands had become. "Grant it," Kieran had replied without hesitation. "But escort them personally. Show them the same courtesy we'd want if we were traveling through their lands." Malric, his beta and closest friend since childhood, had shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Kieran, maybe we should charge a toll. Other packs do it. We're being too soft." "Soft?" Kieran had laughed, his deep voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "There's nothing soft about building alliances instead of enemies. Fear might control people temporarily, but respect? That lasts forever." The room had murmured agreement, but Kieran caught the brief flash of something dark in Malric's blue eyes. At the time, he'd dismissed it as concern for the Pack's resources. Now, trapped in this cell, he recognized it for what it truly was: jealousy. The sound of footsteps in the corridor snapped Kieran back to the present. 3 figures approached his cell, their faces illuminated by the harsh fluorescent lights that had replaced the warm torches his grandfather's generation had used. Technology and tradition mixed uneasily in the supernatural world, but Kieran had always tried to embrace both. Malric stood in the center, his sandy brown hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. At 32, he was 2 years younger than Kieran, but the stress of leadership had already begun to show in the lines around his eyes. To his left stood Elder Patricia Hawthorne, a stern woman in her 60s whose silver hair was pulled back in a tight bun. On his right was Thomas Chun, the Pack's legal advisor, clutching a thick folder against his chest. Well, Malric drawled, his voice carrying that fake concern that had become his trademark over the past few months. "The great Alpha Kieran reduced to this. How the mighty have fallen." Kieran forced himself to stand, ignoring the way the movement sent fresh waves of pain through his wolf-starved body. "Cut the act, Mal. We both know why I'm here." "Because you're a traitor," Elder Hawthorne spat, her weathered face twisted with disgust. "Because you sold out your own pack for power." The accusation hit him like a physical blow, even though he'd heard it dozens of times during his trial. "I never." "The evidence speaks for itself," Thomas interrupted, pulling a tablet from his folder. The screen showed copies of messages, bank transfers, meeting schedules. All fake, but convincing enough to fool a pack desperate for someone to blame after a series of recent attacks on their territory. Kieran stared at the fabricated evidence that had sealed his fate. Malric had been thorough, he'd give him that. Every document looked authentic, every witness statement perfectly coordinated. The story they told was simple. Alpha Kieran McKenna had been secretly negotiating with the rival Shadowclaw Pack, planning to merge territories in exchange for maintaining his position as Alpha of the combined packs. "You were always jealous of my father's choice," Kieran said quietly, his gray eyes locking onto Malric's. 20 years of friendship, and this is how it ends." For just a moment, something flickered across Malric's face. Guilt? Regret? But it was gone so quickly that Kieran might have imagined it. Your execution has been scheduled for tomorrow night, Elder Hawthorne announced, her voice carrying the weight of pack law. Under the blood moon, as tradition demands for traitors to the bloodline. The blood moon. Kieran's stomach clenched. In werewolf culture, there was no more sacred time than when the moon turned red, signaling the presence of ancient spirits. It was considered the perfect time for justice, when the old gods themselves would witness the righteousness of their actions. The pack voted, Thomas added, though his voice lacked conviction. 37 in favor of execution, 8 against, 3 abstentions. 8. Kieran held on to that number. 8 wolves still believed in him, still trusted that their alpha wouldn't betray them. It wasn't much, but it was something. I have one request, Kieran said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. According to pack law, a condemned wolf has the right to one final wish before execution. Malric's eyes narrowed. What do you want? To see my son, the words came out barely above a whisper. To hold him once before I die. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Kieran's son had been born just 3 weeks ago. A perfect little boy with Alara's dark hair and what the midwife swore were Kieran's gray eyes. He'd only gotten to spend a few precious hours with the baby before Malric's accusations had torn his world apart. Absolutely not, Elder Hawthorne snapped. You've lost the right to. Actually, Thomas interrupted, his lawyer's mind already working through the implications, pack law is clear on this. A final wish must be granted unless it poses a direct threat to pack security. Malric was quiet for a long moment, and Kieran could practically see the wheels turning in his head. Finally, his former friend smiled, but it was cold and calculating. Fine, Malric said. You can see the boy. But only during the execution ceremony, and only for a moment. Let everyone see what happens to wolves who betray their own blood. As the 3 figures walked away, their footsteps echoing in the corridor, Kieran slumped back against the wall. Tomorrow night, under the blood moon, he would die. But first he would see his son one last time. He closed his eyes and tried to reach out through the mate bond to Alara, his wife and anchor. Even weakened by the silver, he could feel her distress like a physical ache in his chest. She was out there somewhere, fighting for him in ways he couldn't even imagine. Hold on, my love, he thought into the darkness. Take care of our boy. And whatever happens tomorrow night, know that I never stopped believing in what we built together. Outside his cell window, storm clouds began to gather, as if the sky itself was preparing for the blood that would be spilled under tomorrow's crimson moon. Alara McKenna crept through the shadows of the pack house's administrative wing, her newborn son strapped securely against her chest in a carrier that muffled his breathing. At 28, she'd always been known for her fiery red hair and equally fierce temper. But tonight she moved with the calculated silence of a wolf on the hunt. The baby stirred slightly, and she pressed a gentle hand to his back, whispering softly, "Shoo, little one. Mama's going to save Daddy." 3 weeks. That's how long she'd had to prove her mate's innocence, and time was running out faster than sand through an hourglass. Tomorrow night, under the blood moon, they would execute the only man she'd ever loved, unless she could find the proof that would expose Malric's lies. Her bare feet made no sound on the polished hardwood floors as she approached the beta's office. The door was locked, but Alara had prepared for this. She pulled a small device from her pocket, a lock-pick set that her human college roommate had taught her to use during a particularly rebellious phase. Some skills, it turned out, were more useful than others. The lock clicked open with a soft snick that sounded deafening in the silence. Alara slipped inside and immediately moved to Malric's computer, her heart hammering against her ribs. The screensaver showed a picture of the pack's leadership team from happier times. Kieran's arms slung around Malric's shoulders, both of them grinning like the best friends they'd been since childhood. How could you do this to him? She thought bitterly as she began searching through files. Most of the documents seemed normal: patrol schedules, territory agreements, supply orders. But then, buried in a folder marked personal, She found something that made her blood run cold. Email threads with an address she didn't recognize, discussing timeline acceleration and eliminating obstacles to progress. She quickly photographed the screen with her phone, her hands shaking with adrenaline. One message in particular caught her attention. The Alpha's growing influence with neighboring packs is becoming problematic. Suggests moving to Phase 2 ahead of schedule. The pregnancy provides perfect emotional leverage. The baby. They've been planning this since before her son was even born. A sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps growing closer. Alara quickly closed the files and slipped out through the office's back exit, which led to the building's service corridor. Her wolf senses picked up Malrik's scent approaching the front entrance, and she had to bite back a growl of frustration. She'd only scratched the surface. 2 days earlier, the packed council chamber had felt more like a courtroom than the warm meeting space Alara remembered from better times. The 5 elders sat behind their curved table, their faces grave and unforgiving. She'd requested this emergency session, hoping against hope that reason might prevail. Please, she'd pleaded, standing before them with her son in her arms. Just look at the evidence more carefully. These documents, these witness statements, they don't add up. Kieran would never betray this pack. Elder Hawthorne had barely glanced at the analysis Alara had prepared. Mrs. McKenna, we understand this is difficult for you, but the evidence is overwhelming. What evidence? Alara had snapped, her control slipping. A few emails that could have been faked? Testimony from wolves who suddenly came forward only after Malrik offered rewards for information. That's when Malrik himself had entered. His timing perfect as always. Alara, he'd said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I know this is hard to accept. Kieran was my best friend too. But sometimes the people we love aren't who we thought they were. You're lying, she'd shouted, her wolf pushing against her human restraint. Several elders had shifted uncomfortably, and Alara realized her mistake. Showing emotion, losing control, it made her look desperate and unreliable. Malrik had moved closer, his blue eyes filled with manufactured concern. The safety of this pack has to come first. Kieran's relationship with the Shadowclaw pack threatens everything our ancestors built. His execution isn't about revenge, Alara. It's about survival. Elder Chun had nodded slowly. The beta speaks wisely. We cannot let personal feelings override our duty to protect the pack. Then let me present new evidence. Alara had demanded. Give me more time to investigate. The time for investigation is over, Elder Hawthorne had declared. The sentence stands. Now, racing through the night toward the detention facility, Alara's mind churned with everything she'd discovered. The emails were just the beginning. She'd also found financial records showing suspicious payments to several pack members, including 2 of the witnesses who'd testified against Kieran. But would it be enough? The detention facility was heavily guarded, but Alara had one advantage. She was still technically the Alpha's mate, and pack law granted her visitation rights. The guard, a young wolf named Marcus who'd always been kind to her, barely looked up as she approached. Here to see him? Marcus asked softly. Please. Just for a few minutes. He nodded and led her down the corridor to Kieran's cell. When she saw her mate through the bars, bruised, weakened, but still radiating that quiet strength that had first drawn her to him, her heart nearly broke. Alara, Kieran breathed, rising to meet her at the bars. You shouldn't be here. If Malrik finds out, let him try to stop me, she whispered fiercely, reaching through the bars to touch his face. I know you're innocent, Kieran. I'm going to prove it. Even if you could, there's no time. There's always time for the truth. She pressed her son closer to the bars so Kieran could see him. He needs his father. And this pack needs its real alpha. Kieran's eyes filled with tears as he looked at their child. Promise me something. If I don't make it through tomorrow night, take him somewhere safe. There are forces at work here bigger than just Malrik's ambition. What do you mean? I've been thinking about the timing of all this. The accusations, the attacks on our borders, the pressure to merge with other packs, it's all connected. Someone wants Moonridge Pack weakened, and they're using Malrik to do it. Before Elara could ask more questions, Marcus returned. Time's up. Sorry, Luna. As they walked away from the cell, Elara's mind raced. If Kieran was right, if there were outside forces manipulating events, then tomorrow night wasn't just about executing a supposed traitor. It was about destroying everything the pack had built. She looked down at her sleeping son and made a silent vow. Whatever was coming, whatever conspiracy was unfolding around them, she would not let it win, even if it meant standing alone against the world. The blood moon was rising, and with it, the fate of everyone she loved hung in the balance. The crimson moon hung like a wound in the night sky, casting an eerie red glow over the sacred circle that had witnessed pack justice for over 2 centuries. Ancient stone markers formed a perfect ring in the clearing, each one carved with symbols that predated written werewolf history. Tonight, the air itself seemed to thrum with supernatural energy, as if the old spirits were already gathering to witness what was about to unfold. Elara stood at the edge of the crowd, her son wrapped tightly in a soft blue blanket that had belonged to Kieran's father. The baby was unusually quiet, his tiny eyes wide and alert as if he could sense the gravity of the moment. Around them, nearly 200 pack members had assembled, their faces painted with shadows and uncertainty in the blood moon's light. She recognized most of these wolves, families she'd shared meals with, children she'd helped teach in the pack school, elders she'd respected since joining the Moonridge Pack 5 years ago. Now they watched her with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if her grief might somehow be contagious. "This is madness," whispered Sarah Chun, Thomas's daughter, who'd been Elara's closest friend before everything fell apart. "Whatever Kieran may have done, this feels wrong." "Then speak up," Elara hissed back, her green eyes flashing with desperate hope. "You have a voice here. Use it." But Sarah looked away, her courage failing under the weight of pack pressure. Like so many others, she believed the evidence that had been carefully crafted to destroy Kieran's reputation. The isolation felt like drowning, surrounded by people who'd once loved her mate, yet completely alone in her certainty of his innocence. The sound of heavy footsteps drew everyone's attention to the northern edge of the circle. 6 guards emerged from the tree line, their forms silhouetted against the red-tinged darkness. In their center, barely able to walk under the weight of silver chains, came Kieran. Elara's breath caught in her throat. 3 days of imprisonment had taken their toll. His dark hair hung limp and tangled, his usually clean-shaven face now rough with stubble. Dried blood marked where the silver manacles had rubbed his wrists raw, and his gray eyes, once so vibrant and commanding, seemed dimmed by pain and exhaustion. But even in this broken state, something in his bearing made several pack members step back instinctively. An alpha's presence wasn't easily diminished, even by betrayal and chains. "Behold!" Malrik's voice rang out across the clearing as he stepped into the circle's center. "The wolf who would have sold us all for power." Malrik had dressed for the occasion in traditional ceremonial robes, deep black fabric embroidered with silver thread that caught the moonlight. An ornate dagger hung at his side, its blade etched with ancient pack symbols. He looked every inch the righteous leader, ready to make the hard choices that leadership demanded. The crowd murmured, some in agreement, others in uncomfortable silence. Elara noticed several wolves she'd counted as friends avoiding her gaze entirely. "Tonight, under the blood moon, justice will be served," Malrik continued, his voice carrying easily across the sacred space. "Our ancestors watch from beyond the veil, and they will see that Moonridge Pack still honors the old ways." Elder Hawthorne stepped forward, carrying a scroll that contained the formal charges. Her voice cracked slightly as she read. "Kieran McKenna, Alpha of Moonridge Pack, you stand accused of conspiring with enemy forces, planning the betrayal of Pack territory, and endangering the lives of all Pack members. The council has found you guilty of high treason against your own blood. The evidence was presented, added Elder Chun, though he couldn't quite meet Kieran's eyes. The witnesses spoke. The verdict was reached according to pack law. Kieran lifted his head, surveying the crowd with a calmness that unsettled many of those present. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse but steady. I've never betrayed this pack. Everything I've done has been to protect our people and honor our traditions. Lies, Malric spat, moving closer to his former friend. Even now, facing death, you can't tell the truth. The truth is that someone has been very careful to destroy everything I've built, Kieran replied, his gaze never leaving Malric's face. The question is why? A ripple of unease moved through the crowd. Despite the evidence, despite the trial, something in Kieran's demeanor gave some pack members pause. This wasn't how a guilty wolf usually faced execution. Alara felt her son stir in her arms, and she looked down to see his tiny eyes reflecting the red moonlight with an intensity that seemed almost supernatural. The baby had been unusually alert all evening, as if the ancient power in the air was calling to something deep within his bloodline. Enough, Malric declared. The time for words has passed. He drew the ceremonial dagger, its blade gleaming like liquid silver in the crimson light. According to the old laws, a traitor's death must come by silver, under the witness of the moon and stars. The circle fell completely silent except for the whisper of wind through the surrounding trees. Even the night insects seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and had gone quiet. Malric raised the dagger, beginning the ancient ritual words that would make the execution official in the eyes of both pack law and supernatural tradition. By moon and star, by fang and claw, by the blood of our ancestors. Wait! Alara's voice cut through the chant like a blade. The entire pack turned to look at her as she stepped forward, her son clutched protectively against her chest. According to pack law, the condemned has the right to one final wish. Malric's jaw tightened, clearly annoyed at the interruption. This was already discussed. He may see the child briefly. Then honor that promise, Alara demanded, her voice ringing with authority that surprised even herself. Let him hold his son before you take his life. For a moment, the two stared at each other across the sacred circle. The beta poised to claim ultimate power, and the alpha's mate fighting for one last moment of mercy. Around them, the blood moon seemed to pulse with increasing intensity, as if the ancient spirits were drawing closer to witness what would unfold. Finally, Malric smiled coldly and gestured for her to approach. Very well. Let everyone see what becomes of those who trust in traitors. As Alara walked toward the center of the circle, her heart pounding against her ribs, she had no idea that this single act of defiance would change everything. The silver chains clinked against the ancient stones as the guards forced Kieran to his knees in the center of the sacred circle. The metal had grown so hot from prolonged contact with his skin that steam rose faintly from his wrists, but he barely noticed the pain anymore. All his attention was focused on Alara as she approached, their son cradled in her arms like the most precious treasure in the world. Please, Kieran's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried across the silent clearing. Let me hold him. Just once. Malric's laugh was harsh and mocking. Look at the great Alpha, begging like a common rogue. He gestured dismissively to the guards. Release his hands. Let him have his moment with the boy. It will be his last. The crowd watched in tense silence as the guards unlocked the manacles around Kieran's wrists. The sudden absence of Silver's burning touch sent relief flooding through his system, and for the first time in days, he could feel his wolf stirring weakly in the depths of his consciousness. Alara knelt beside him, her green eyes bright with unshed tears. His name is Aiden, she whispered, gently placing their son in Kieran's shaking arms. Aiden James McKenna. After your grandfather. The moment Kieran's skin touched his son's, everything else faded away. The jeering crowd, Malric's triumphant sneer, even the ache of his battered body, none of it mattered anymore. In his arms lay 3 weeks of life, innocent and perfect, with tiny fingers that immediately wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength. "Hello, little wolf," Kieran murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry I won't be here to teach you how to shift, or how to be a leader, or how to choose the right path when everyone else is choosing the wrong one." The baby's eyes opened and Kieran's breath caught. Instead of the slate gray he'd inherited from his father or the emerald green of his mother's, little Aiden's eyes were shifting, swirling with colors that seemed to catch and reflect the blood moon's crimson light. For a moment, they almost seemed to glow with an inner fire. "That's enough," Malric declared, raising the ceremonial dagger once more. "Time to finish this charade." But as he began to step forward, something extraordinary happened. The blood moon, which had been hanging steadily in the sky, suddenly blazed brighter, its light intensifying until it bathed the entire clearing in deep scarlet radiance. The ancient stone markers around the circle began to hum with a low, resonant frequency that seemed to vibrate in their very bones. Aiden's eyes flared with sudden, brilliant light, not reflecting the moon anymore, but generating their own luminescence. The glow spread from his tiny form into Kieran's arms, racing up through his father's body like liquid starlight. "What the hell?" Malric stumbled backward, his confident demeanor cracking for the first time. The mystical energy exploded outward from the center of the circle, washing over every wolf present with a force that sent many of them to their knees. But this wasn't an attack, it was an awakening. Ancient power, dormant for generations, suddenly roared to life in response to the innocent life cradled in Kieran's arms. The air itself seemed to shimmer and tear, reality bending like heated glass. From the space between heartbeats, between breaths, between one moment and the next, a figure began to materialize above the sacred circle. It started as mist and moonlight, then gradually solidified into the translucent form of a massive wolf standing nearly 8 feet tall at the shoulder. Its fur was silver-white shot through with veins of starlight, and its eyes held the wisdom of centuries. When it spoke, its voice resonated not just in their ears but in their souls. "I am Fenris McKenna, first alpha of Moonridge Pack, keeper of the ancient bloodline." The spirit's gaze swept over the stunned crowd before settling on the small family at the circle's heart. "I have been watching. I have been waiting. And tonight, under the blood moon, I bear witness to injustice." The crowd erupted in gasps and whispers. Some wolves fell prostrate before the apparition, while others backed away in terror. Elder Hawthorne's face had gone bone white, and even Malric seemed frozen in shock. "Impossible," he whispered. "The ancient spirits haven't manifested in over a century." Fenris's ethereal form padded closer to Kieran, who remained kneeling with his son, too awed to move. "The true alpha bloodline calls to me through this child," the spirit continued, his voice like wind through ancient forests. "Power recognizes power, innocence calls to justice, and the old magic stirs in response to both." The ghostly wolf lowered his massive head toward baby Aiden, whose eyes were still blazing with otherworldly light. "In this small one flows the purest essence of our lineage, untainted by politics, untouched by corruption, unmarked by the petty jealousies that poison adult hearts." Kieran found his voice at last. "Great Alpha, my pack believes I've betrayed them. They're preparing to execute me for crimes I never committed." "I know," Fenris replied, his ancient eyes filled with both sadness and righteous anger. "The lies have been carefully woven, the evidence skillfully crafted. But truth has its own power, and tonight under the sacred moon, that power will be revealed." The spirit turned his attention to the crowd, his gaze lingering especially on Malric, who was backing slowly toward the edge of the circle. "You seek to spill innocent blood on sacred ground, to break the bonds that have held this pack together for generations. But the old magic will not permit such sacrilege." Lightning that held no thunder crackled between Fenris's paws, illuminating the clearing with brilliant white light that made the blood moon's glow seem pale by comparison. "Before justice is served, truth must be spoken. Before blood is shed, all deceptions must be stripped away." The spirit's voice rose to a commanding howl that shook the very foundations of the earth. Let the guilty be revealed. As the supernatural energy reached its crescendo, Kieran felt his own power returning. Not just his weakened wolf, but something deeper, something connected to the ancient magic flowing through his son. Whatever was about to happen, he realized this moment had changed everything. The execution was no longer inevitable. In his arms, baby Aiden gurgled softly, his glowing eyes fixed on something beyond the physical world, as if he could see truths that would soon be revealed to everyone else. The blood moon pulsed one final time, and reality held its breath. The air crackled with ancient power as Fenris's ghostly form began to circle the sacred stones, his ethereal paws leaving traces of silver light on the ground. The blood moon seemed to pulse in rhythm with his movements, and baby Aiden's eyes grew brighter still, as if channeling the very essence of his ancestral spirit. The truth shall be shown, Fenris declared, his voice echoing from everywhere and nowhere at once. Let the pack witness what has been hidden in shadow and deception. Suddenly little Aiden opened his mouth and spoke, not in the babbling sounds of an infant, but with the clear, resonant voice of his ancient ancestor. Behold the treachery that has poisoned this sacred ground. The crowd gasped in collective shock as the impossible unfolded before them. The baby's glowing eyes projected beams of light that spread across the clearing like a living screen. And within that light, images began to form, vivid, undeniable visions of the past months. The first scene materialized with crystal clarity. Malric meeting with Victor Shadowclaw, alpha of their rival pack, in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Moonridge territory. The conversation was damning. The plan is working perfectly, the vision Malric was saying, sliding a thick envelope across a metal table. Kieran suspects nothing. Once he's gone, I'll merge our packs under my leadership, just as we discussed. Victor's scarred face split into a cruel grin. And the evidence? Already planted. Financial records, forged emails, witness testimonies, all perfectly crafted. My human contact in the tech sector made sure the digital trail would fool even our best investigators. The present-day crowd watched in horror as their trusted beta counted out thick stacks of cash. In the center of the circle, Malric had gone pale, his confident facade crumbling as his most damning secrets played out for all to see. Lies, he shouted desperately. Illusions. The spirit has been corrupted. But the visions continued, each one more devastating than the last. They saw Malric secretly meeting with pack members, bribing some with promises of better positions, threatening others with exile if they didn't support his version of events. They watched him plant the forged documents in Kieran's office, his face twisted with concentration as he worked by moonlight. The most shocking revelation came next. A scene from 6 months ago, showing Malric standing over the body of David Thornfield, the pack's former head scout. You know too much, old friend, the vision Malric whispered, withdrawing a silver blade from David's chest. You were getting too close to the truth about my meetings with Shadowclaw. Several pack members cried out in anguish. David's death had been ruled an accident during a patrol, his body found at the bottom of Raven's Gorge. Now they watched their beta drag the corpse to the cliff's edge and push it over, staging the scene with meticulous care. Murderer! Sarah Chun screamed, her voice breaking with grief. David had been her mate's closest friend, and his death had haunted the pack for months. The vision shifted again, showing Malric forging Kieran's signature on documents, doctoring bank records with sophisticated software, and even coaching supposed witnesses on what to say during the trial. Each revelation hit the crowd like a physical blow, their trusted beta exposed as a masterful manipulator who had played them all. Stop this! Malric roared, desperation driving him to action. He raised the ceremonial dagger high, abandoning all pretense as he lunged toward Kieran and the glowing baby. I won't let you destroy everything I've built. But the pack's loyalty had shattered along with their illusions. Marcus, the young guard who had always been kind to Alara, stepped directly into Malric's path, his eyes flashing amber as his wolf surged to the surface. "You'll have to go through me," Marcus growled, his voice deepening with the partial shift. Jake Morrison, Kieran's former head warrior, joined him immediately. And me? His betrayal had been one of the most painful parts of Kieran's fall, but now his face was etched with shame and fury. I should have known. I should have seen through the lies. More wolves moved to form a protective barrier around their true alpha. Sarah Chan, Elder Rodriguez, Thomas's son Michael. Even some who had voted for Kieran's execution now stood between Malric and his intended victims. "You're making a mistake," Malric screamed, backing toward the edge of the circle as his supporters melted away. "The Shadowclaw Alliance is our only hope for survival. Kieran was going to lead us all to destruction with his weakness." But his words fell on deaf ears. The pack had seen the truth. Not just Malric's betrayal, but the carefully orchestrated conspiracy to destroy their unity and deliver them into enemy hands. Some of Malric's remaining loyalists tried to rally to his defense, but they were vastly outnumbered. Elder Hawthorne, who had been one of his strongest supporters, stared at him with naked horror. "How could you?" she whispered. "David was like a son to me. You killed him and let me believe it was an accident." "I did what was necessary," Malric snarled, all pretense of remorse gone. "Kieran's idealistic nonsense would have gotten us all killed. Sometimes leaders have to make hard choices. Like murdering innocent pack members?" Jake spat, his muscles coiled for action. "Like framing your best friend? Like selling out to our enemies?" The circle was collapsing into chaos as wolves chose sides. Most rallied to Kieran, but a handful of Malric's most devoted followers tried to fight their way to his side. Claws extended, fangs bared. The sacred circle that had witnessed centuries of justice was about to become a battlefield. Through it all, baby Aiden continued to glow with supernatural light, his infant voice still carrying the ancient spirit's words. "Let justice be served. Let truth prevail. Let the pack be cleansed of corruption." The blood moon blazed overhead like a crimson eye, witnessing the moment when lies finally shattered and the real battle for Moonridge Pack's soul began. The howls came from the darkness beyond the sacred circle. Dozens of voices raised in a hunting cry that chilled the blood of every Moonridge wolf present. Through the trees, glowing eyes appeared like malevolent stars, surrounding the clearing on all sides. "Shadowclaw Pack," Jake roared, his warrior instincts kicking in despite the chaos already erupting within their own ranks. "They're attacking." Victor Shadowclaw himself emerged from the tree line, his massive gray form rippling with barely contained violence. Behind him came at least 50 of his most vicious fighters, all shifted into their wolf forms and ready for slaughter. The timing was perfect. Moonridge Pack was divided, distracted, and leaderless. "Now!" Victor's voice echoed across the clearing as he gave the attack signal. Chaos exploded in every direction as Shadowclaw wolves poured into the sacred circle. The ancient stones, meant to witness justice, now became a battleground where families fought for their very survival. Kieran struggled to his feet, his body still weak from days of silver poisoning, but his wolf was finally responding. The supernatural energy flowing through baby Aiden had somehow purged the worst of the silver's effects from his system. He wasn't at full strength, but he was no longer helpless. "Ilara, take Aiden and get to safety," he shouted over the din of battle, but even as he spoke, he knew there was nowhere safe to run. They were completely surrounded. A massive Shadowclaw warrior leaped toward them, fangs bared and claws extended. Kieran's partial shift happened instinctively, his canines elongated, his fingernails became claws, and his muscles bulged with supernatural strength. He met the attacker head-on, driving his claws deep into the enemy wolf's throat. Around them, the battle raged with primal fury. Marcus and Jake fought back to back, their coordination perfect despite the chaos. Elder Hawthorne, despite her age, had shifted into a surprisingly formidable silver wolf that tore through enemies with decades of accumulated rage. Even Thomas Chan, usually more comfortable with legal briefs than physical combat, was holding his own against a Shadowclaw fighter twice his size. But they were outnumbered, and the enemy had been preparing for this moment for months. "This is our chance," Malric screamed to his remaining loyalists. "Fight with Shadowclaw, and we'll all have positions in the new order." Several wolves who had supported him tried to rally to his call, but most of the pack now saw him for what he truly was: a traitor who had orchestrated this entire catastrophe. His own supporters turned on him, their loyalty finally shattered beyond repair. Seeing his plans crumbling, Malric made a desperate decision. While Kieran was engaged with two Shadowclaw attackers, the treacherous Beta Dove toward Alara, who was crouched behind one of the sacred stones with Aiden clutched against her chest. "If I can't have the pack," Malric snarled, grabbing the baby from Alara's arms, "then no one can." "No!" Alara screamed, lunging after him, but Malric was already moving, using the baby as a shield as he backed toward the edge of the clearing. The sight of his son in danger sent a surge of raw power through Kieran that dwarfed anything he'd ever experienced. His full transformation erupted without conscious thought, bones cracking and reshaping, muscles expanding, his human form dissolving into that of a massive black wolf with silver markings that seemed to glow in the blood moon's light. "My pack. My mate. My son." The thoughts weren't human anymore, but driven by something deeper and more primal than civilization. He tore through the battlefield like a force of nature, scattering enemies and allies alike. Nothing mattered except reaching his child before Malric could disappear into the darkness with him. "Stay back," Malric warned, holding the ceremonial dagger dangerously close to baby Aiden's throat. The infant was still glowing with supernatural light, but he seemed strangely calm, his unusual eyes fixed on something beyond the physical world. One more step and I'll... His threat was cut short as Victor Shadowclaw himself appeared beside him, having fought his way across the battlefield. "Enough games," the enemy Alpha growled. "Kill the child and be done with it. We need to end this bloodline forever." "No," Malric said, genuine horror flickering across his face. "The plan was never to hurt the baby. I just wanted..." "You wanted power," Victor interrupted coldly. "But you were always too weak to take what leadership requires. I'll finish what you couldn't." The rival Alpha reached for baby Aiden, but the moment his claws came near the glowing infant, something extraordinary happened. Light exploded from the child's eyes with the force of a solar flare, burning Victor's retinas and sending him staggering backward with a scream of agony. "The bloodline protects itself," came Fenris's voice, still speaking through the baby. "Ancient magic recognizes threats to the chosen line." Malric stumbled, momentarily blinded by the burst of light, and his grip on Aiden loosened just enough for the infant to slip from his arms. Kieran was there in an instant, his massive wolf form moving with impossible speed. He caught his son gently in his jaws, then whirled to face Malric with murder in his glowing eyes. "You would have killed my child." Kieran's voice was a deep growl that seemed to come from the earth itself as he placed Aiden safely beside Alara and faced his former friend. "For what? Power? Money? Revenge? I saved this pack," Malric screamed, pulling a silver blade from his belt. "Your weakness would have destroyed us all." They clashed beneath the blood moon in a battle that was both deeply personal and spiritually significant. Kieran's wolf form towered over Malric's human shape, but the silver weapon kept him at bay, each cut burning like acid through his supernatural flesh. Back and forth they fought, ancient friendship turned to bitter hatred, until finally Kieran saw his opening. As Malric overextended with a desperate thrust, the true Alpha's jaws clamped down on his wrist, crushing bone and forcing him to drop the blade. The battle was over. Around them, the remaining Shadowclaw wolves fled into the night, their blinded Alpha stumbling after them. The sacred circle was littered with the wounded and defeated, but Moonridge Pack had survived. Under the watchful gaze of the blood moon, justice had finally been served. The first pale rays of dawn began to creep across the horizon, washing the sacred circle in soft golden light that seemed to cleanse away the crimson shadows of the blood moon. The ancient stones bore witness to the aftermath of battle. Scattered weapons, torn earth, and the lingering scent of blood and fear. But also something else. The sweet smell of justice restored. Kieran stood over Malric's broken form, his massive black wolf gradually shifting back to human shape as the supernatural adrenaline began to fade. His former beta lay crumpled against one of the sacred markers, his right arm twisted at an unnatural angle where Kieran's jaws had crushed the bones. Silver burns covered his torso from his own weapon, and his blue eyes, once so confident and calculating, now held nothing but defeat. Around the clearing, the surviving members of Moonridge Pack slowly picked themselves up from the battlefield. They moved like wolves awakening from a terrible nightmare, looking around with expressions of confusion and dawning horror at what they had almost allowed to happen. Victor Shadowclaw and his remaining fighters had vanished into the forest, carrying their wounded and leaving behind only the acrid scent of their shame. The rival Alpha's eyes might heal, but his pride would take much longer to recover. His perfect plan to seize Moonridge territory had crumbled the moment the ancient spirits had revealed the truth. Elder Hawthorne was the first to approach the circle's center, her silver hair disheveled and her ceremonial robes torn from battle. Behind her came Jake Morrison, Marcus, Sarah Chan and Thomas, wolves who had stood against their true alpha just hours before but now looked upon him with expressions of profound remorse. Baby Aiden had stopped glowing, though his unusual eyes still seemed to hold depths of wisdom that no infant should possess. He lay peacefully in Alara's arms, occasionally making soft gurgling sounds that somehow carried an undertone of ancient satisfaction, as if the spirit of Fenris was pleased with the night's work. "Alpha," Elder Hawthorne said, her voice breaking as she dropped to one knee before Kieran. "We have failed you. We have failed our pack. We have failed everything our ancestors built." One by one, the other survivors followed her lead, kneeling in the ancient gesture of submission and respect. Even those who had been wounded in the battle struggled to show proper deference to their rightful leader. Jake Morrison's voice was thick with shame as he spoke. "I should have known. 20 years of friendship, and I let lies poison my judgment. There's no excuse for what I did, Kieran. None of us have any excuse." "The evidence seems so convincing," Thomas added, though his words carried the hollow ring of inadequate justification. The documents, the witness testimonies, the financial records, it was all so carefully crafted. Kieran looked out over his kneeling pack, these wolves who had been ready to execute him just hours before. The human part of him wanted to rage at them, to demand answers for their betrayal. But the alpha in him, the part that had been strengthened and purified by his connection to the ancient bloodline, understood something deeper. "Fear makes people do terrible things," he said quietly, his voice carrying clearly across the dawnlit clearing. "Malric played on your fears, your doubts, your desire for simple answers to complex problems. He was very good at what he did. He walked among them, helping the injured to their feet, his touch gentle despite everything they had put him through. But we survived. The pack survived. And now we heal." "What of him?" Sarah Chun asked, gesturing toward Malric, who had remained conscious throughout the ceremony but had not spoken a word since his defeat. All eyes turned to the fallen beta, and the silence stretched taut with anticipation. Pack law was clear, traitors were executed, their names struck from pack history, their bloodlines marked with shame. Malric had murdered pack members, conspired with enemies, and nearly destroyed everything Kieran's family had built over generations. Kieran walked over to where his former friend lay broken against the sacred stone. Malric looked up at him with eyes that held no hope of mercy, only resignation to his fate. "Do it," Malric whispered hoarsely. "You have the right. I would have killed you, killed your son. End this." For a long moment, Kieran stared down at the wolf who had once been closer than a brother. Memories flooded through him, Childhood adventures, shared dreams, the day Malric had stood as his best man when he married Elara. Somewhere along the way, ambition and jealousy had poisoned all of that. But the love they had once shared made the betrayal cut even deeper. "No," Kieran said finally. "I won't give you the easy way out." He raised his voice so the entire pack could hear. "Malric Greywood, former beta of Moonridge Pack, I strip you of your rank, your territory, your name, and your place among us. You are banished from these lands, forbidden from joining any other pack, cursed to wander alone until your dying day." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Exile was considered a fate worse than death for werewolves. To be packless was to be less than nothing. A lone wolf without family, without purpose, without the spiritual connection that gave their kind meaning. "You can't," Malric breathed, genuine terror flickering in his eyes for the first time. "Kieran, please. Just kill me. Don't make me live like that." "You made your choices," Kieran replied with finality. "Now live with the consequences." He gestured to Marcus and Jake. "Escort him to the border. Give him basic supplies and a warning. If he's ever seen in Moonridge territory again, mercy won't be offered twice." As they dragged Malric away, his pleas echoing through the forest, Elara moved to stand beside her mate. Little Aiden looked up at his father with those wise, knowing eyes and reached out tiny fingers to touch Kieran's face. "It's over," Elara said softly, leaning into his embrace. "No," Kieran corrected, looking out over his pack as they began the work of tending wounds and rebuilding trust. "Now it begins again." The sun rose fully above the treeline, washing away the last traces of the blood moon's crimson light, and with it began a new chapter in the long history of Moonridge Pack. 3 weeks later, Kieran stood at the edge of the sacred circle as the first light of a new day painted the sky in shades of gold and rose. The ancient stones had been cleansed of battle scars, and fresh wildflowers had been planted around each marker, a living symbol of renewal and hope. In his arms, baby Aiden dozed peacefully, his unusual eyes now a soft gray that matched his father's, though occasionally they would flicker with hints of that otherworldly light they had witnessed under the blood moon. Elara moved to stand beside them, her hand resting gently on Kieran's shoulder. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of rebuilding. Not just damaged structures but damaged trust, damaged relationships, and damaged hearts. Slowly but surely Moonridge Pack was healing from the wounds that betrayal had left behind. "The council wants to know your decision about the Morrison Pack's proposal," Elara said softly, referring to the alliance offer that had arrived just that morning. Word of what had happened during the blood moon had spread quickly through the werewolf community, and several neighboring packs were now eager to align themselves with Moonridge. Kieran nodded thoughtfully. "We'll accept, but on equal terms. No more of this hierarchy nonsense where stronger packs dominate weaker ones. If we're going to build alliances, they need to be based on mutual respect and shared protection." It was a radical departure from traditional werewolf politics, but then again, everything about Kieran's leadership had evolved since that night. The experience of facing death, of seeing his pack manipulated by fear and lies, had crystallized something essential in his understanding of what it meant to be an alpha. The sound of footsteps drew their attention to Jake Morrison, who approached with the careful respect of someone still earning back trust. "Alpha, the patrol reports are in. No sign of Shadowclaw activity along any of our borders. Victor seems to have retreated deep into his own territory." "Good," Kieran replied, "but maintain the increased patrols for another month. A wounded predator is often the most dangerous." As Jake departed, a familiar presence seemed to stir in the air around them. The temperature dropped slightly, and the morning mist began to swirl in patterns that defied the gentle breeze. Baby Aiden's eyes opened and began to emit a soft, warm glow. Not the blazing supernatural light of the blood moon, but something gentler, more peaceful. The translucent figure of Fenris materialized once more, though fainter than before, as if the veil between worlds was slowly thickening again. The ancient Alpha's spirit looked tired but deeply satisfied as he gazed upon his descendants. The bloodline is secure, Fenris said, his voice like wind through summer leaves. The pack is unified. Justice has been served and mercy has been shown. The balance is restored. Kieran bowed his head respectfully. Great Alpha, I feel the weight of what lies ahead. Other packs are watching to see if our new way of leadership will succeed or fail. The responsibility is exactly what it should be, Fenris interrupted gently. Leadership was never meant to be easy, great-grandson. It was meant to be worth the effort. The spirit moved closer to baby Aiden, who gurgled happily and reached tiny fingers toward his ghostly ancestor. In this child lies the future of not just Moonridge Pack but all packs. He will grow to be a bridge builder, a unifier, one who sees strength in cooperation rather than domination. Fenris's ancient eyes met Kieran's. You have learned the most important lesson any alpha can master. That true power comes not from forcing others to submit, but from inspiring them to follow willingly. Fear may control temporarily, but love and justice create loyalty that lasts generations. As if responding to his ancestors' words, Aiden let out a delighted giggle that seemed to ring with the pure joy of innocence. The supernatural glow in his eyes faded gradually, leaving behind the normal, curious gaze of a healthy baby, discovering the world around him. He will not need the old magic to lead when his time comes, Fenris continued, his form beginning to fade as the sun climbed higher. What happened during the blood moon was necessary to reveal truth and restore balance. But his strength will come from something even more powerful: wisdom, compassion, and an unshakable understanding of right from wrong. Will we see you again? Alara asked, tears glistening in her green eyes. The spirit smiled, an expression of infinite gentleness and pride. When you need me most, I will be there. But I believe that need will be far rarer than you think. You have everything required to build the future this child deserves. As Fenris's presence faded into the morning light, his final words echoed across the sacred circle. Lead with love, rule with justice, and remember that the strongest packs are built not on the bones of enemies, but on the trust of friends. Kieran looked down at his son, who was now reaching for a butterfly that had landed on the edge of his blanket. This tiny life, this perfect combination of his and Alara's hopes and dreams, represented everything they had fought to protect. What kind of world do you want to grow up in, little wolf? Kieran whispered, adjusting the blanket as a cool breeze stirred the clearing. As if in answer, Aiden smiled, a pure, radiant expression of joy that seemed to promise that whatever challenges lay ahead, love would be strong enough to overcome them. The blood moon had tested them all and found them worthy. Now, under the gentle light of dawn, the true work of building a better future could begin.